Hello everyone, and hi EK. How you doing today?
I'm good. I'm very good. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm so glad you're here today, and as you can see, everyone in below here on the screen, "What's Good English" is the name of EK's channel, and I definitely recommend that you subscribe to it because it's fascinating. EK's channel covers a lot of language topics, and one of the topics that really interests me in particular is AAVE, African American Vernacular English, which is something, and later I'll talk about like my own like perceptions of it years ago and what I now understand about it, and hopefully we'll get other people today in the chat to talk about what they thought it was, and hopefully you can help a wide
Absolutely.
audience, which I know is not limited to people in North America, but also in Europe, of this channel who don't know anything about it, might not realize that this is a dialect of English with its own grammar, which is very interesting. So, EK, if you like, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, definitely. I've pretty much always had like a love of languages, even though it took me like 3 decades to actually become bilingual. um, but it's always been like an interest of me, just like, how people, communicate and everything like that. I sort of discovered my love of like linguistics, like way too late into my college years and to where I couldn't change my major like and do that. Um
Eh, yep,
yeah.
that's familiar.
Yeah, yeah, that's how it goes. It's like, oh, I really want to do this, but like I don't have an extra 20,000 to spend to get this degree.
Oh
you
my gosh, yeah. Yeah,
know?
let's talk about our education system, which
Yeah,
is
yeah,
something that's so
exactly.
nice to do as YouTubers, and, I'm not a there's so many more like, I talk about Latin and ancient Greek stuff, but the professionals out there who are so good, who do it like, they do, the hard work of teaching students in the classroom, friends of mine, colleagues, people who know the languages so much better than I have all respect for them. I happen to have this, I have a YouTube channel, and I like to talk about things, so I'm able to provide sources and education just like you are now, which is so great because now we're basically creating a new kind of, educational thing, right?
Yeah.
Like Jackson Crawford and Simon Roper, for example, have been creating these videos and topics which are able to communicate really detailed concepts. Like, how could anyone learn about the grammar of AAVE in the detail that I now have been exposed to thanks to your videos? It
Yeah,
just couldn't
yeah,
happen.
exactly. Yeah, like
Maybe a
even
university course, but I don't think many.
yeah, it's like you have to be like I think they offer courses in it in like in California and a few schools, and I'm
Mhm.
sure there are some courses about it. Like you have to be at those schools, and there are a few books about it as well, but it's not like an English
Mm.
book. Like you
Right.
can't pick up a book like How to Speak AAVE. It's like you,
Right. It's
you
not
have
a
to
textbook.
yeah, you naturally absorb it. It's like, language back in, the day in the Western world where the clergy were the only ones that learned how to read and write. And if you were reading and writing, then it's like, oh, you're trying to be a monk, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, and Jace, who's been a follower of the channel for a while, he wrote me a nice email as well this morning. Thanks again for that, Jace. Just talking about how, in particular, the importance to him and a lot of other people about this topic. Um, I obviously am not African American, so why am I interested in this topic? I think it might be worth commenting on. I think it's similar to at least why I wanted to talk about the Scots language last year. I talked with a fellow last year who wrote an excellent textbook on basically that teaches the Scots language, and which in I think there are some parallels that it's um, a variety that is closely related to English, and whether one considers it a dialect or a language is mostly a political question. But that the Scots, I call it a language. Scots language has been derided as some kind of lesser form for centuries or at least
Right.
decades, depending on where you go, and therefore is considered not to be something okay. But when now um, I'm not from the UK, or from Scotland, obviously. So I'm kind of interested in. I was like, wow, this is a language that's super similar. I feel like I'm when I says learned Italian, like learning Spanish, like, oh, this is really like this is clearly a different language with a different grammar, but I can learn it so easily, and it's so rich with poetry and music, and so
Mhm.
it just it makes sense to learn it. So I don't have any of the associations that I assume many Brits do, whether they're Scottish or English or wherever they might come from, where they think, oh, this is a part of one's heritage, or this is something that's to be looked down upon, and so forth. Um, Now with AAVE, well, actually, I'm gonna stop talking about it for a second because I want to ask you, EK. Could you please tell us what is AAVE?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me just plug in. Let me put these headphones on because I'm getting kind
Yeah,
of like an
sure.
echo on it.
Yeah, no problem.
Cool. Just 1 second.
And yes, we have comment by Froggy Woggy talking about we're talking about habitual B. Absolutely.
Oh yeah,
I definitely want to
definitely.
talk about at least some of the main grammatical differences. There was where did I talk about? I talked recently in more than one video. You know, Latin's a dead language, and what that really means. And but we can also add new vocabulary to Latin. So people are like, well, it's not a dead. You know, it's not a. It is evolving. Well, if you add vocabulary expressions to a language, that's neologisms. That's not really changing the language very much. But when you change the grammar, like the sophisticated elements of AAVE, for example, which simply don't exist in standard forms of English,
Right.
um, anyway. So what is AAVE?
So AAV, there's sort of like an alphabet soup of different like titles to call it. But it's basically just refers to like the manner in which like Black people or like the descendants of enslaved people like came to like form English. They pulled everybody over here in like the 1600s, and they separated them by languages as well. So they didn't want more than two or three people that spoke the same mother tongue in the same group. So they couldn't like plot against the slaveholders or whatnot. So they were forced to speak English. They were completely divorced of their language and their culture, but at the same time it was illegal to educate like an enslaved person. Like you couldn't like teach an enslaved person how to read. You could be punished for that. If you were an enslaved person that knew how to read, you could also be punished for that. So if you don't you know if you force me to teach your language or play your game of chess, like, but you don't give me the rule book, and you force me to come up with how I'm supposed to speak it on my own,
Mm.
I'm going to end up making my own version of that. And over time, that's going to solidify, all the little mistakes that I'm making are going to become features instead of mistakes. And it's going to basically evolve into its own language, which is basically what happened. But
And that's how pretty much every language develops.
yeah,
Um,
exactly.
and remind me later because I want to interrupt you to talk about the difference between like Italian and Latin. Like Italian is terrible Latin, but it's sophisticated. Why is that? You know, but go on, please.
Yeah. The other interesting thing about AAVE, especially modern AAVE, is that it continued to evolve like after slavery was abolished. So, like from the late 1800s up until like even the 1960s and 70s, it was still like under transformations,
Mm,
and like modern AAVE is really only about what, like 50 to 60 something years old. Like the
mm.
habitual B is not something that people were slaying or saying, back when, they were enslaved. That developed much later. Stuff like zero copula, at least my particular theory is that that also developed later, because take like the verb to be just in and of itself. Like in Spanish there's like three different verbs for that do the exact same thing that to be does. You've got ser, estar, and haber. If I'm
Right.
forced to figure out how to use or how to speak, Spanish, but you don't tell me the rules of grammar or everything, like, one or two of those verbs are going to get deleted, or they're only going to be used in like very narrow circumstances. That sort of happened with am, is, and are, because in African American vernacular, we don't really say is and are, but we still say am,
Mhm.
because, one verb like usually does all of the heavy lifting when you're first trying to learn a language. If you listen to like older slave recordings, you'll hear people say like we am and they am instead of, they are, we are, or he. You also see like you'll hear like he am as well. But then that got deleted, but am stuck around because I am was always correct. At least that's my
Right.
theory on why we still say am, but we don't say is and are.
Yeah, and I wanted to point out right away because I know people simply don't know that much about this topic. But I'm so happy about, what I love about your videos is, well, so many things, but one of them is that you describe this language variety in linguistic terms, like zero copula. And if you don't mind, I wanted to define it because not a lot of people could be familiar with that. So the copula is the verb, usually is or are or am. It's a verb to be, it could be in the present or the past, depends. This copula means bringing things together, right?
Right.
So I am Luke. You are EK, right? And zero copula languages, like say Russian, Yaluk or Yaluka, if I wanted to use a Russian version of my name. Yamerikanic, there's no is or am. Other Slavic languages do have that. Russian does not. Does that mean Russian is, like bad Slavic or something? No, that's just how the language is. And Latin frequently, like in Latin mottos and all kinds of sayings, frequently omits that verb in a very similar way. So which is interesting that people might only be familiar with standard English, what
Right.
good English, good standard English, and then see something that it strays from that, and without knowing these other things about other languages and the huge variety of language in the whole world, look down on something different, which would be just as silly as an Italian looking down on Spanish, because Spanish has estar and ser, and Italian rarely uses the equivalent of estar.
Yeah. Yeah, it's weird. I get like I get a ton of comments. Like I just recently uploaded a video to my TikTok. Like I'm a lot bigger on TikTok than I am on YouTube, which is also weird because I only started a TikTok account to sort of promote the YouTube channel, but that's what grew. But anyway, I get loads of comments like, "Oh, well, that's just bad grammar." Still, like I can explain it like with perfect linguistic terminology, or and give tons of examples, and people will reply, "Oh, well, that's how it works in Russian, like where you were saying," or American Sign Language, I've been told, is like the exact same. They don't use a copula for that either. But then I'll
Mm.
get people that will, just instantly reply back, "Oh, well, you know, like they swimming, that could be, in the past or the present or whatever." And it's like, dude, this video, like at the start of the video, I said this is just the present tense. Like, I mean, you still have to use a different verb to let people know in Russian that you're talking about something in the past or the future. Like our language works the
Yeah.
same, but
There was the video, I can't remember what it was. An eyewitness was speaking in AAVE, and the person was trying to dissect the language to accuse the person of being false in what he was saying, because it was like confusing the past and the present. I'm like,
yeah,
in
yeah.
my extremely limited knowledge of AAV, just from like listening to it in media, I know that I could understand what he was saying. But yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
crazy.
it's like some people, I mean, it so for one, if you live in the United States, you're born and raised here, you grew up around like or just the culture in general. You don't really even have to grow up around black people just because it's spoken so widely and it's, in nearly all parts that you'll encounter it. And so with that, some people don't really think bigger or, outside of the US where, people are learning English maybe as, their second, third, or fourth language, and it's more incomprehensible to them, or, to them it sounds cool. It's like, oh wow, that's cool how that works. That's like this other language that I speak, or, something like that. It's like the US really promotes monolingualism. Like there are so many bilingual people in this country, and like you could not tell that by the way that we act.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I find there is an element of that pretty much everywhere I've gotten to live around the world. I think you're right. Most I It's kind of just sort of a default thing when it's simply not necessary for most people to learn another language. I'm really fascinated by language like you are, so I want to learn. Well, I wish I could learn as many languages as I could, but I just find it's just like I couldn't be who I am without taking an interest in language. But that's simply because, but whereas say a lot of Europeans, I don't think Europeans on average are necessarily more interested in language. They just have to learn at least English, or like everyone else in the world, usually has to learn English at some point, and maybe
Right.
another language of a German might want to learn French. A Someone in Portugal might want to learn Spanish, that kind of thing. Um, but So they get an exposure which opens their their I was gonna say exposure, and that's it. Yeah, they get exposure, which allows them to appreciate it more, and we just don't
Right.
have that. So yeah, I mean that is sort of how it is.
Yeah, yeah, true. But it's a learning process. There are a lot of people really interested in it. Like it's I get a lot of comments that are like, "Hey, thank you for doing this. Like this is very interesting. I'm interested in seeing, how more of this works." So like, and it's also, just like sort of just like a general learning process, or just acceptance, like it's like with the whole ebonics fiasco of the 90s, where everybody was just like staunchly against it. And now it's like, okay, well, maybe that was a bit of an overreaction. Like this is like you guys are clearly speaking different. And it's a lot too with Gen Z, for example. Um, like Gen Z was pretty much the first generation that really had like a good bite of black culture in the mainstream. So like for me growing up, if I wanted to hear rap music, it was like either some hugely famous rap song made it to mainstream radio, or we had to listen to the black radio station, or we would, to watch black TV shows, we would have to rely on, new up and coming networks, like UPN, Fox when it first started, WB, like UPN and WB before they merged and became CW, basically. Like we had to rely on those stations that tried to build their viewership off of our audiences. So we got to see, black shows then, but not
Mm.
everybody knows about, the existence of, those particular shows. But with Gen Z, it's not strange for them to, or it wasn't strange, in the 2000s for them to turn on their TV and, see black people or see a show with a predominantly black cast. They watched, The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air on Nick at Night when I was watching stuff like Green Acres and like, what else I used to watch? I think Mr. Ed was on there,
Yeah. Oh, I
which,
watched
yeah,
Mr. Ed too. Yeah, I watched all those stuff with Nick at Night. Yeah.
yeah. So with them, they co-opted some of our slang,
I want to talk
and
about the
some of our
Gen Z
speech.
thing too.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and that's how I think uh, we should really frame it. Because what I understand about Gen Z, and like as someone said who was a European, that he had learned elements of AAVE through internet slang. I mean, the idiomatic expressions or vocabulary are not grammar, and that's what's so interesting. Grammar is just so like, that's why English is not a Romance language, even though we could easily point to most of our vocabulary, except the commonest words, coming from French or a variety of French, which is no longer standard French, obviously, which is
right,
interesting how, modern French would probably look down on the variety of French that came into English, or Latin, or ancient Greek, and all these things. We have all this stuff in it. But English is still a Germanic language because our grammatical structures, like ending sentences with the prepositions, like you pointed out in one of your videos, are natural to Germanic languages.
yes,
Um, so let's if so the yeah, we talked about the how AAV is a zero copula except for the first person singular for I.
right,
Um, and I have your playlist up because they basically each cover an awesome topic. Uh, the We've Been Done said that that's really complicated, and I find that fascinating.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. I'm actually gonna redo that episode as well.
really, I
So
love it.
yeah, so I read
That's
a
great.
book. I'm still leaving it up, but
Oh yeah, do do.
um, I read a book by John McWhorter, called "Talking Back, Talking
Mm,
Black," and in that book, he was talking about done as well, and because done basically, like, to translate it, it's like you're just subbing have in the past tense, like they have like eaten 5 cheesesteaks or something like that, like. But he mentioned that a linguist whose name I forgot watched like just a ton of black media, just like tons of
mm,
black movies, TV shows, read books and everything. And they concluded that done also like means that it's counter expectations. Like for example, like I can say like, you done ate 5 cheesecakes, but that's sort of like a surprise, like ate five. Like, I didn't think somebody could eat five cheesesteaks. You don't eat five? That's kind of how that works. Because I could say you ate five cheesesteaks with, the surprise, but it adds like an extra element of that, of surprise or counter expectations
I'm
to
gonna
it.
transcribe that too. Here uh, is that right?
Um, you don't eat five. Yeah, exactly.
Except steak is not written that way. I can't even write. That's a standard English word. I messed it up. Sorry, everyone.
Yeah, I'm
And also, I
horrible at
want to.
spelling. I'm horrible at, like, if I have
Well, I mean,
to I have to
this
write
is
my
the
own captions now, so, like, I'm
yeah.
sure they're
It's
full
just
of
oh
spelling
man, I
errors.
make typos all the time when in every single video. Hold on. Did I spell it right this time? Where'd it go? There it is. I think it's written as one word. I don't know. English spelling is English. Whatever variety of English the spelling is challenging.
Your
Oh, I
guess
also
is as good
noticed.
as mine.
Oh yeah, and I noticed you did something in your more recent videos with the ing, which is in
Right.
AAVE, which is the same in Scots and many other dialects of English. Even in Shakespearean times, it was only pronounced in
Yeah.
the ing. At least for as far as like David Crystal, who's written some amazing books. Actually, it's that. Where is it? It's over right there. It's in the background, but it's holding up a painting, so I don't want to move it. On the original pronunciation of English, talks about that. These are and what you did is you used to write it with an apostrophe as if the G were removed, and then you stopped, and I thought that was great because it's never ing, right? In
Yeah.
AAVE,
Yeah,
it's
it's
so
never
it's
ing. It's always in. Yeah,
so having the apostrophe would only be like, oh, this is like an apology because this is not standard, but instead it's like, no, this is just I'm deciding to spell it this way. I don't have to bring an apostrophe to apologize for something that shouldn't be there in this variety of the language.
yeah, exactly. And I used to, like, as a kid, I would always, like, when I was writing something, I wanted it to be in AAVE, I would, put I in apostrophe. Like, that was just a habit that I created because there wasn't like official spelling. Like, we couldn't look up, like, okay, how are we supposed to spell ending? Do we do that with the apostrophe? Do we just do the N and leave the G off like I do? So, like, I do sort of a mix with that. But, with the internet and Twitter and everything, like, finally we had, because before also, like, we would always just write everything in standard English. Occasionally we would sub, a few words that,
Yeah.
but it would just be like the standard English word. And, when you're reading it, you read it in the voice of, the person who wrote it. So it's like, okay,
Yeah.
well, this says, like, this says for, but, I know we're pronouncing that like faux. So, or this says store,
Right.
but I know, like, oh yeah, they went to the stove.
Mm.
So, but now, with the internet, with Twitter, with memes, stuff like that, yeah, black people that want to intentionally sound black in stuff that they write. So you're now seeing people, like, specifically, like, develop their own spelling of words, like, and like fitna, for example. Like,
Oh, that was fascinating. I was
yeah,
really interested in that.
there are
Uh,
tons of ways to spell that thing.
if Fitna. Wait, oh, I want to talk about Fitna, but I want to talk because I put it up on the screen. You done a. Well, and also, let me apologize. I made the same apology last year when I was speaking with the Scots speaker that I was
Yeah.
trying to speak it. I was doing it badly. So EK, please forgive me on any pronunciation or anything I do that's wrong. And anyone out there who knows and appreciates AAVE well, please forgive me because this is essentially a foreign language to me, foreign dialect that I'm trying to um, learn and pronounce in a way that's not offensive. So, with this phrase, you done ate five cheesesteaks. What does that mean? Like, what is the done doing here?
So in this sentence, done is saying, like, it's basically signifying that you are, like, have some sort of surprise that they've eaten five cheesesteaks.
Ah,
Like, it's like, if I were to just translate it so that everyone would understand, I would just say you have eaten five cheesesteaks, or you
right.
have, or like, I have, or I've eaten. Oh yeah, you don't eat. It's it's like translating back and forth. Like, sometimes gets a little bit weird.
Sure. Yeah, code
So,
switching.
like, yeah, you've eaten five cheese. Like, you have eaten five cheesesteaks, but, like, done is just like it's like a vocal. It's a voiced marker of surprise, basically. In that sentence, we use it, like, all the time. Sometimes it doesn't really carry a lot of, like, the meaning of surprise, just because we say it a lot, just like we say up a lot.
Hmm.
Like, up under that couch, it could just mean, like, directionally, like, it's going to be, like, right under the couch, like you should instantly see it. Like, or it could mean that, up in my
Mm,
house is okay, my house is familiar to me, so I'm up in there. You're up in my face, like why are you in my personal space? That's what that up is doing there.
mm. Interesting. Yeah, yeah, and the habitual be. I want to talk about that one too. This one that John McWhorter talks about a lot in his podcast. I haven't read his book. I've read one of his books, Our Magnificent Bastard Tongue, which is about just the evolution of English. But I've heard, so that's where I got introduced to the really, like, this is something that is a language variety, dialect language, whatever you want to call it, with its own rules. It's not just some kind of uneducated variant. Um, so yeah, we're both fans of John McWhorter, which is awesome. What did I want to mention? Oh, I was just thinking about it. You were just talking about writing in it. And I have some friends around. A couple of them are here. Ciao, who they write like to me occasionally in Roman dialect, and there's some spelling differences and pronunciation things and idioms, and it's just I love that so much too because it's how they feel and interact with the world, and then I get to appreciate where they're coming from more if I'm able to understand them. And I think
Right.
that's why I wanted to talk with you today and kind of bring this to people, because some people in the comments, um, one person who's been polite but who seems to be skeptical, it was saying like, well, this is, it's just bad English or just a right. Well, no, I mean, what, by bad English, like this is like whatever way that people are communicating with is simply language. Now, however we define that as a dialect or a language, usually language usually has some kind of prestige status. One can learn a language in a university. One usually
Right.
doesn't learn a dialect in a university, and one would probably never learn slang in university. However, whatever these terms are mostly just subjective labels which categorize things. And you and I were talking yesterday too about like Danish, Swedish, and Norwegian being extremely close, depending on the varieties, and that in like and it was actually you brought that really nice comment on my video about dialect versus language.
Yeah.
And I started out with the a language is a dialect with an army and a navy, the
Right.
Yiddish
Right.
phrase. I actually can't pronounce it, I don't remember it. And yeah, I mean that's a big part of it, I think.
Yeah, yeah, it's like you said, it's a lot of just, prestige status. With AAV in particular, like, because I'm sort of moving all the way into just like calling it a language instead of a dialect for a couple of reasons. One, like, there's another linguist, Diana, I can't remember her name, but I wrote it down. So I wanted to make sure I mentioned her name on this live. Let me just pull up my notes. Uh, it's where Deanna Latimer Hearn. So she specializes in, AVE. She's also got a website, respectthedialect.com, I believe is what it's
Mm,
called. But she mentioned there are a lot of kids that, are basically like bilingual one way with AAVE. We grow up speaking ebonics or AAVE, African American language, the alphabet soup of titles, like I was saying.
mm,
So but we can perfectly understand standard English spoken to us. Like, they just can't reproduce like the desired standard English back. Whatever
mm,
they want to say back comes out in AAVE. And with those kids in testing, they put them in, like special education classes, or, say that they're slow or they need to catch up to their peers that,
yeah.
don't have, you know, the trouble with reproducing the desired standard English, answers when they, give them a standardized test or figure out where they should be placed when they go to school. Like, however, like, there's if the kids were bilingual and spoke another language, there's money for that. And there's a program that, like, there are basically programs that teach, kids that speak, Spanish, how to speak English. Like they have like a whole system for that. The schools can get extra money to help those kids along and get them and get them caught up with their peers and basically translating between the two languages. If there's like a developmental disability or something like that, there's money for that as well, like to, help those kids along. But if you're not reproducing standard English because, you have trouble code switching, then there's no money for that. So those kids just suffer.
Right.
So
That's terrible.
yeah.
Pontus, I'm sorry, I'm not sure what your name is, Pontus, I don't know how to say it in Swedish, says that as Swede, it seems to me that Swedish and Norwegian have more in common than Standard American English and AAVE. I don't know enough about the Nordic languages to say if that's true or not, but
Neither
it
do I.
easily could be. And certainly like something like Scots and Standard English are definitely more different for the most part. Yeah, and I have an opinion, and I'm just a language guy. Like I don't really. I'm a guy who's enthusiastic about language.
Yeah.
In
Me
general,
too. Me too.
I
Yeah.
don't like seeing language varieties which are clearly legitimate. And I want to talk about that too, like legitimate language. Like, what does that mean? Because legitimate would be like legal status, but even in the United States, English, as I recall, doesn't actually have official status. It's certain states have selected English as official language, but it's just like the de facto
Yeah.
language
Exactly.
of the land. So it's not like whatever legitimate means. Um, the point is that when people communicate, they are using language, and that's legitimate in the common sense of the term, meaning people are using it and it's working. It's not, if it were bad or incorrect, then they simply wouldn't use it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like
Yeah.
a good example of that actually is like the whole end a sentence in a preposition thing. Like everybody said, in Latin you can't end a sentence in a preposition, and all the derivatives
Interestingly, you
of
can.
Latin you can't end a sentence in a preposition. Like you really
Yeah.
can do it. It just sounds so aggressively bad when you do it that people will say, no, no, please say it like this. This is nails on a chalkboard to me.
Well,
So
right.
that
Well,
whole
there are some prepositions which became adverbs and some adverbs which became prepositions. So depending, like contra is a Latin preposition, which Cicero ends plenty of phrases and sentences with contra. Non sum contra, something like that. I'm not against it. I'm not against. But it's adverbial, so it's like, oh, it's not a preposition anymore. But this is all. It's sort of it's technicality. Or I love the Winston Churchill thing. Ending a sentence with a preposition is something up with which I will not put, which is great because he's making fun of prescriptivists who are imposing something on standard English that isn't natural to it and saying it has to be a certain way. And I got up, let's see, did I get the right window? Let's see if this is the right one. Yes, slang, because we have some skeptics who are watching, which is fine. Thank you for being polite. If you're polite, please express your skepticism, because we're not here just to um, talk to people who are already have bought in to the idea of what AAV is in our estimation. We're happy to express why we have come to this conclusion. That is a legitimate or real form of human communication. Slang. What is slang? Basic definition: a type of language that consists of words or phrases that are regarded as very informal or more common in speech than writing, are typically restricted to particular context or group of people, um, and so forth. But that does not include grammar, right?
exactly.
So if I'm to use army slang, if I'm tracking this, if I'm understanding this, then AAV cannot possibly be relegated to simply slang. Nor is slang bad. I use slang all the time. I use slang
Yeah.
in Italian with my Italian friends. I use slang in English. I use slang in Japanese. And that's a very important natural thing to do. And I'm sure besides the standard forms or the more common forms of expression that exist that we could call general enough to even call standard in AAVE. I don't know anything about that. I'm sure there are things that would be considered slang too in AAVE, right?
Yeah, exactly. It was like every single language or in every version of that language, has its own slang. Like even like if I was in Spain, I would be like, "Oh, que chulo, tío." But if I'm in Colombia, I'm like, "Oh, que chévere," or like
Right.
Dominican Republic, "Oh, que lo que tigre, como tú estás?" So it's like that's accepted slang for whatever country you're in. The same thing with AAVE. Like we have our own slang within the language, but slang isn't grammar.
Yeah.
Like the word fitna again, like that's not slang, that's grammar. Like that's
Yeah.
the expression fixing to, which got shorted into fixna.
Mhm.
The same thing with going to becoming gonna. Like everybody says gonna, not everybody knew about fixing to, so it's not as widely used. But among our community, it's more of a southern phrase. But once the Great Migration happened and a lot of Black people started moving out of the South to the West and to the North, we brought some of those Southern phrases with us, and fixing to, like over time, morphed into fixina or fitna, fista, tons of different ways to say it.
Yeah. And I want to talk more about that. But this, I like this question from Duodecimus. Is AV regionally distinct in the U.S.? Like, would someone in Louisiana speak AV differently than one in California? What do you think?
So yes, so like there's a baseline, just like there's a baseline with English, there's a baseline with AAVE as well. Like there are different expressions and phrases and pronunciations that people will have. There are also different varieties. Like so even within the U.S., so like there's Gullah, which is the lingua franca to African American vernacular, which I can say that confidently because there's a guy that teaches Gullah at Harvard that also makes TikTok videos that
I'm glad
like
because it was asked before the we started today about Gullah, and I don't know anything about it. So I'm glad you're. Please tell us more about it.
yeah, so it's the Carolinas, it's like northern Florida is like one other state as well. Like there's like just a specific amount of people that kept more of their African heritage, like as well as sort of making like different little additions and changes to English, and it has like its own sort of like pronunciations and accent. Like for example, like I need subtitles when somebody is really speaking like just hard go. It's like, wow, okay. Like
Mm,
it's comprehensible.
mm,
It's intelligible, especially if you already speak AVE, if you're a native
mm,
speaker of AVE. But like me as a person that has a series about AVE that talks about it and makes videos about it needs to turn on subtitles to see like,
mm.
oh, okay, that's what they're saying. All right, dope.
Interesting.
Yeah, or and a huge example. So this is a Gullah word that everybody knows. Well, it's not really a Gullah word, but the song "Kumbaya." So the word "Kumbaya" actually doesn't exist. They just kind of like changed that into it. The
Mm,
original singer was singing "Come by Here," and that was Gullah, but it's so hard. The
the
accent was
accent.
like so
Yeah.
hard, so that they assumed he was saying something else, so it became kumbaya, but it's really just come by here.
That's so interesting. There's that reminds me of something that's not really the same thing, but there in the so when Standard Latin comes into being, like say first century BC, I think it was Cicero, I don't remember. Someone is commenting on an old prayer that is just they just wrote it as they remember hearing it, but it just doesn't make sense in Standard Latin. Like you can kind of only get some of the words, and linguists have now, in the present tense, have um, deconstructed it to understand it in terms of evolution from Proto Latin and Old Latin and stuff like that. So they've been able to. Does anyone know what I'm talking about out there? I'm sure someone will think of it. I think Andrea, you might know it because he's here. Um, because they just were repeating something that didn't make sense anymore, or like the Vedic Sanskrit, where they preserved a huge amount just by singing and repeating orally for thousands of years, but they've lost some of the distinctions of what certain words are supposed to be because a lot of them actually, because they just kind of sing them together and they're all blended together, and it's like the kumbaya. It's come on, come by here. How about that?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, my mind was just pshh when I heard that. I was like, "Oh, wow,
Yeah.
okay, that's" I told my friend, he was like, "That can't possibly be right." And he goes like, "Oh, okay, that's my entire life is a lie."
Yeah, and I was thinking about, someone else was, talking, said in the comments, axing instead of asking, and one of my favorite things that was inserted into, a great show, Futurama. So Futurama,
Yeah,
which I remember not liking it as much as a kid, but then I saw it like after I was a university student. I'm like, "Oh, this is brilliant!" Because then I appreciate all the sci-fi references because I'd become a sci-fi fan at that point. But something that they do linguistically is every time any character, and they all, for the most part, they speak just standard American English, except that because it's in the year 3000, every time they say the word ask, it's ax.
yeah,
Every time, and it's something that one might not even notice if one's not paying that close attention, and it's a brilliant little thing to where they just said, "Well, probably by this point, 3,000, 1,000 years in the future, everyone will make that switch because that sk." I mean, the word asterisk, a lot of people pronounce it asterix, just
yeah.
because that's phonetically easier for most English speakers to say, and that the sk is a kind of a weird thing. So it's not unique, I don't think, to AAVE to do that per se. It's actually, I think, very common in many dialects of English.
Yeah, yeah, it is. Something else that that Deanna was saying that like AV is kind of structured as like consonant vowel, consonant vowel. So a word like ask could be like difficult for a native speaker. That's also why you get like desk instead of desk, like
Mm,
that. Um,
that's interesting.
yeah, but also linguistically, like axe existed. Like axe was first, from what I understand. Like
That's
even
Jackson
Shakespeare.
Crawford told me that as well, yeah.
Yeah, and like Shakespeare used axe, and
Yeah.
um, the other thing from Sun is Sun Michaud is the Harvard professor that of linguistics that also teaches Gullah. He mentioned in a video about ask versus axe, and he said basically what happened was they printed the Bible with ask, and that became what we like know
Right.
as the proper
It's a
pronunciation of
spelling
the word.
pronunciation.
Yeah.
That's and also the word "yes" is a spelling pronunciation. In, the 1600s Shakespearean English, it was "yis," but the spelling pronunciation ended up taking over "yes." Or another thing that I learned from, David Crystal book, which is back there, on the original pronunciation of Shakespearean English, is that the H had basically vanished in most varieties of English, and it was restored in the 16 and 1700s, so that for a majority of English speakers do pronounce the H, except a couple places where it didn't carry over to the US, like herb and what's another one? We have another one. Herb is one of them, whereas herb is standard in British English. And but they're universally honor and another one I can't think of never caught that, never restored that H.
Hmm.
Um, so it's
Interesting.
interesting how language, what could be considered correct or normal is then considered non-standard and therefore bad. Also, so much of subjectivity, which is really interesting. I think that a lot of the topics I've dealt with on this channel are really about confronting, including my own previous biases, which I can talk about and how I changed my mind on certain subjects. How people might have a worldview or a view, not a worldview, a view on a specific topic. Like, say, the idea that AAV is merely slang, or whatever term they want to give it, that say it's not good or worthy of study or any interest. Like, say, people talk about the Scots language that way, or say Neapolitan, perhaps, or other varieties of language in Italy that are not standard Italian, and say, oh, these are not worthy of study because they're not standard, and as if that's like a totally rational thing. And I think that's completely rational. And it's just like, well, hey, everyone out there, you don't have to like AAVE. You
Yeah,
probably heard
exactly.
a lot of it though in media and songs and entertainment. It's probably worth going to EK's, sorry, EMC, EK's channel here. Here's the link again. Subscribing and watching at least his. Was there's only is 11 videos right now in the series,
Yeah, in the series, yeah, I think something like 11 videos.
and they're fantastic. I want to talk about how awesome your videos are a second if I can. Um, and just go through them because I'm probably never going to try to learn it for a lot of reasons I want to talk to you about too. I like to learn to try to speak it, but I do want to be able to comprehend it because the subtleties of grammar are they're not just, they're very expressive and they're highly sophisticated. And standard English has plenty of sophisticated things too that say Italian can't do or Russian can't do. But these kinds of things are worth learning about because since we're constantly exposed to them, just as a speaker of English, which pretty much everyone in the world wants to be, I think it's worthwhile to at least learn something about this dialect or language or variety of English, AAVE, in order to know what's going on. And then to, of course,
Yeah,
give it, I think, the least modicum of respect that it deserves, which is that this is simply how people communicate. It's not bad English. It's
yeah.
something else.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. It deserves respect. I mean, like, growing up as a kid, it was always like the teacher said, say it right. Okay, fine. Like say it right just means say it in, standard English or something like that. And a lot of us, me as well, grew up thinking, oh yeah, we just speak with a lot of slang. But
Mm.
it's not really just it's not we speak with a lot of slang. We are actually just speaking a different language that just has different structures, different grammar, just everything like is different. It's just intelligible because and it's only intelligible to, people who don't speak it just because they live here. If I said something like, let me think, my mom and I'm finna go to the store right quick, you want some? You know, like that might be intelligible to you because, you grew up here in America. However, like if you speak English as a second language, you probably have no idea what I just said.
Right. And why not, when it's as simple as watching a few excellent videos on your channel to learn something about it, and then when we inevitably encounter it, at least in songs or in a movie or something like The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, we know, like that historical had, that was really interesting. Andrea was also talking about how Frankish priests were baptized in nomine Patris et filiae instead of filii, a non-standard. Which is basically it's incorrect because they're repeating these these things that they didn't know, which is sort of what we were talking about before. What did I want to talk about? Oh, I want to talk about how much I love. So I love your videos because, of course, you deal with the issue in a linguistic way. But unlike great videos like Lang Focus, who did a video about AAV some months ago, and I learned
Yeah,
that was
that's
like
a
my first.
great video.
It is a good video, yeah, very great video because that was really what like I hadn't really thought about it in like years, and I saw a video and I was like, this is just like it's not just like Scots, but it's very similar to the situation of Scots, where this is something that, for a lot of political or cultural or whatever subjective reasons, has been derided when there's that maybe that's probably not the way to go for the way we think about it. Um, I love how much time and effort you put into the scenes that you do, where you have play multiple characters. You play a young boy, you play a mother, a father, friends speaking together, commenting on someone else. I think all your characters are great. I like above all, what they convey is clarity of the linguistic meaning, and you do that really well, I think, with the performances that you're doing and you're acting. You're not overacting
Appreciate
at all,
it.
I don't think. And like, because if you were, I don't know, because you're not overacting, but if you were overacting, maybe that would distract from the linguistic thing. I think it's exactly the right amount of naturalness and clarity. So, in addition to getting, which is so great. So if we're interested in learning language, we like to get input. We're getting input, but in a very controlled way. It's one thing just to, watch a movie which might contain AAVE and then like maybe pick something up, but to have it so controlled and targeted on one single grammar topic, this is why I think everybody out there should subscribe to your channel.
Yeah, that was sort of an amalgam of ideas that I got. So basically, like the idea for the channel and everything came just from when I started learning Spanish. I thought, well, first I kept meeting people that had like a huge like understanding of English. You know, they're like C2 English speakers, but you know, there were still things that would give them trouble, like, you know, just different random phrases or idioms that, you know, we have like barking up the wrong tree. So I was like, oh, you know, it would be cool if I like did, you know, if I had a channel where I was just performing like a little sketch that demonstrated what barking up the wrong tree meant. And like thinking, like coming up with doing African American vernacular came later, but I also ran into the channel Dreaming Spanish, which is
Mm.
just Pablo and all of his other teachers just, you know, speaking Spanish about like a particular topic, and you just pick up, you know, different words, phrases, the rhythm of speech and everything all through comprehensible input. So it
Yeah.
was like, okay, well, if I can control the context and just talk about this one particular element and try to make it, you know, funny and memorable, I think
Mm.
people, you know, will learn that concept.
Yeah.
And yeah, it just expanded from there.
Mm.
And you know, I'm not opposed to, you know, putting a wig on and talking in a weird accent if it'll teach you something. Like I will make myself look like a fool if you learn something.
And
So
that's why you have to do it, and thank you so much for doing it because, and no, I don't think maybe you're putting on performance and you're teaching, us about, I think something that we should like like everybody in the world who's obviously we're speaking standard English now, so people who are I know many people who are watching are not native English speakers. I think they should know something about this. I think all native and non-native English speakers should learn at least something about AAVE and to understand that this is whatever legitimate means is a
yeah,
legitimate language variety.
yeah, because you will 100% encounter it, like whether or not, like honestly, whether or not you know, come to the U.S. or not. I mean, um, if you listen to like a Lana Del Rey song, like Lana Del Rey's music does not exist without the influence of Black culture. The way she
Right.
pronounces certain words, the way like certain things are sung, that is clearly like influenced from how we spoke English. You know, a song like Summertime Sadness, where she's singing, I got that summertime sadness. Like, I got that is something that we would say. It's in the modern, you know, lexicon now, but
Mm.
like, you know, I got something like that's how AAVE uses that. We don't say have. Like, if not for our influence, that would be
And
I have summertime sadness.
hey, let's stress that again. The verb have isn't used in the present tense at all, right? In AV?
Like,
It's
it's
replaced by
used,
got and done and many
yeah.
other different phrases
Yeah,
or
got
words.
is, yeah, got's the number one go-to. Have does still get used, but differently. So it's like, oh, you're gonna have me looking like a fool in front of these people, for example.
Yeah,
That's
not as an auxiliary, as the main auxiliary, but it's I've seen that like in the sequence of the verbs. It's not in the subject and then have. Oops, doesn't seem to occur, but then subject. And would you say I?
yeah, it's more used
I'll
in
write
the
the example
future.
down that you just said. I didn't catch it though.
Yeah, it's more used in the future tense than it is the present tense. Like we would say, like I wouldn't say that we would say got, you know, like 10 times or 10 times out of 10 over have. Like the other thing is there's a lot of code switching that goes on even within the
Mm.
same sentence where, you know, I'm speaking standard English and I'll flip into AVE and I can flip back into standard English. So like it's like I've been meaning to do like an episode on how we code switch because hardly anybody, at least that I know, speaks, you know, AV 100% of the time.
A lot
You
like
know,
Scots speakers. Very few Scots speakers are pure Scots speakers.
yeah, we just hop into it and we hop out of it. Some of us stay in it for longer than others. It depends on, you know, your level of comfort or your ability with it, or you know, your audience, you know, whatever the case may be. But it's hard to find anybody that just stays 100% in AVE the entire time. Um, so like you will hear have, but you might just like it might just be a flip that switch where we said it then and then it just goes on to something else afterwards.
Yeah. Um, and Muhammad here is saying, is it just a dialect of English and not a language? My response to this, I actually talk about this. I would say, Muhammad, definitely watch my dialect versus language video. because essentially the term what is a dialect or what is a language is mostly a subjective description. For whatever reasons, often they're tied to national, governments and things, or other things. So what is considered to be a language or a dialect, um, and the dialect. I mean, like slang is usually that's not a prestige term. Dialect, linguists know it's worthy of respect. Language is usually what the general people understand is something that ought to be, worthy of respect, or like that's why I insist on calling Scots a language, um, even though a lot of it is pretty intelligible. But mutual intelligibility is a very poor test for language when Danish, Norwegian, and Swedish are considered to be different languages. And yet they're quite mutually intelligible. I understand, and I don't speak any of them.
Yeah.
Arabic
Like,
is another one,
yeah.
where
Another good example is
oh, go ahead.
Galatian and Portuguese.
Yeah,
It's like nearly the same language.
they're super similar. Yeah, they say, like, Portuguese is a dialect of Galician. Um, or, let's say, like Arabic, there's certain dialects of Arabic, especially, that are geographically quite separated. Where if unless they know modern standard Arabic and, maybe they haven't had a chance to have that kind of education, like, I think maybe as far east as Iraq, as far west as Morocco, it's as if you don't have mutual intelligibility, and yet they're considered dialects of Arabic. But Danish, Swedish, and Norwegian are considered different languages, and so mutual intelligibility is also a poor test as well. So I think the terms language and dialect are just we're going to use them in some way or other, and it's probably because we have a certain subjective feeling about it. Like I expressed my subjective feeling of why I decided last year to go with, like, I'm going to call Scots a language because I want to learn it, and that makes me feel like I'm learning something that's more real. Uh, and also because I think by repeating that, it starts to change people's minds about that it deserves, respect. Um, and you want to do the same thing with AAV, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's like I said, that level of prestige, one, plus two, it's important with just this country. Like if we don't recognize it as a language, there's nothing to help out, kids that can only reproduce AAVE and not standard English um when like there's like nothing wrong with their mental capacity or anything like that. It's just they're not producing the desired answer even though they're perfectly answering the question. For example, like some of the tests that they give kids to figure out where they place them in schools is like, okay, well, what did your mother do yesterday? And a kid might say, oh, well, mama worked yesterday. So that is like clearly past tense. We're clearly talking about past tense, but the kid didn't say my mother worked yesterday.
Yeah, can you say it again?
Like my mother worked yesterday versus my mother
Right.
worked
And
yesterday.
I noticed this, and just from listening to your videos, the ed, or usually ed, the ending for past tense, seems to be dropped almost all the time, where we would expect in standard English. Is that right?
Yeah, it's certain consonant clusters like tend to get dropped. So the ed like will, depending on the word, will either get changed to an n or just like a k sound. So like we're saying, like if we're saying worked, if we write it down, we're also writing worked.
Uh-huh.
Like, but it sounds like work.
My name ends in a silent E, so that's just a spelling. Yeah, it's a spelling convention. Nothing wrong with that. Okay, so what about, would it be pronounced, so third person singular, does it take an S? If you say so if it were in standard, my mother works at the bank. How does that sound?
So in the present, we don't conjugate the third person at all.
That's
So
what I was
it
thinking, right?
yeah, it retains the exact same. So like
So
I work, you work, he work, like all of that. Same thing with irregular verbs like I do, you do, he do. We don't use does.
right, just like Swedish.
Yeah.
With Swedish, if I remember, it's like jag är, du är, whatever he is. It's always as this är, like this be that for the
Yeah,
copular
yeah.
verb. So
Or Mandarin Chinese does the same thing. It's like
yeah, well, sure, meg I'm an American, right? Just sure. Exactly. Um, which is so interesting, and too, because I was just thinking, took a little passeggiata, a little walk, outside today while I was listening to some of your videos, and I was thinking about this Italian verb, which is just a common verb we say all the time. It means to do it. It's farlo. It means to do it. That's all it means. Farlo equals to do it. Whatever that is. It's something that it is incredibly common. It's said all the time. Of course, if we were looking at it from a standard Latin perspective, this would be terrible because it's derived from this facere illum, or even illud if it were the neuter one, but it doesn't really matter for this example. The final M is lost. The U changes to an O. The initial IL, the il, that's lost, even though that's where the stress is. It's lost anyway. And facere goes through like a facere, facere, fare, fare, because it's the regular verb, the infinitive is fare. Of course, Spanish does this too, for like hacer,
Yeah, it must be hazlo.
hacerlo, right? Hacerlo, right? So it's Latin cannot do farlo, a two-syllable word, which is it has to be facere illum, facere illud, or with other versions of that in Latin. So you have more syllables, and the economy and loveliness of just being able to put these enclitics at the ends of infinitives is something Latin cannot do, but it is standard thing that's mandatory even in Spanish, Italian, and it's like, so this is sort of the idea that these, like, Spanish has had prestige for a long time. Catalan has been struggling to gain prestige, and I think the Catalan speakers have been doing really well with that. Other varieties of Italian languages, like I don't think Neapolitan has the same respect that Catalan does. And I'm not a native speaker of any of those. That's my observation.
Yeah.
And and why? It's simply because Castilian Spanish is the language of and the versions of it that preceded it that were older have been passed on for a long time as the standard language, and it's just an idea of prestige. And I had an opinion too, and let me know what you think about this. Thinking about the ebonics fiasco. Actually, could you tell us about the ebonics fiasco? And then I wanted to talk about how my opinion formed, changed, and so forth.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Also want to point out one comment that
Oh,
I
please
just
do.
saw that I want to talk a little bit about.
Is there recent? Happy to find it if you want to put it up on the screen.
It's DQ Tube. Is AAVE intelligible to Jamaican patois? Like that is. So I'm a Jamaican. I have Jamaican heritage. Like my grandparents were from Jamaica. Like um, I did not grow up speaking that particular accent. However, or not accent, dialect version of English. However, uh, every time I went to Florida to visit my grandmother, we always hung out with Mr. Smith and like who was her friend, and like he had a heavy Jamaican accent and everything. And there are tons of similarities and parallels between Jamaican patois and AAVE. For example, double negatives. Like we both use double negatives the exact same. Um, the like the word dead, for example. So to imply extra stress, something. For example, you're dead last. You're dead wrong. I'm dead serious. It's like something that a lot of people say now. The word dead ass to mean I'm serious. That came from that sort of that the etymology of that is we used to say I'm dead serious, like and that one thing we do in AVE is we add ass to the end of a word to create sort of like a new sort of like angrier pronoun or showing some of
Did you
like
see that Finnish
disgust.
comedian who commented on that?
I
He's a
I think I
stand-up
remember seeing
comedian.
something.
Oh, it's great because of course that the ass emphatic post positive. I don't know how to describe it linguistically. That's like is something that is also been adopted into a lot of colloquial American English.
Yeah,
Um,
everyone says it
as
now.
yeah, I mean, I'm sure I've said it, in some situations. And this Finnish comedian, very funny. I can find the link, or someone can find the link. He basically says like everything is us, and it's really funny because he's just got this great deadpan view of a foreigner thing. I'm sorry I interrupted you, EK. Please
Oh,
continue.
no, no, no worries, no worries. That's a good call out. But yeah, that's one of the similarities. Like, so we both use dead the same way. So we had dead, or I'm dead serious, I'm dead ass serious, and you can't really add, like there's some words you can just add as to, and some words you can't. So like the other versions of dead, like dead last, like nobody says you're dead ass last. That doesn't make a lot of that. It just doesn't sound good, so nobody says that. So dead ass just became serious. So now we just say I'm dead ass, and that just means I'm serious.
That's so interesting. I hadn't heard that before. I'm dead
Yeah.
ass. Wow. And just as a yeah, the economy of language, which is interesting because people I've this is something that you encounter from even well-educated classics professors. I've heard say something like, "Oh, the classical languages were so much better because of their sophistication, their grammatical complexity." And it's just like, wow, what a shame that this has been taught and that these people believe this. It's really not true. Because English, or let's look at, I don't know, Italian, a Romance language, or even Spanish, Romance languages that we're both familiar with. Are Spanish and Italian less sophisticated than Latin? No, I just showed an example with the farlo, or we could say hacerlo. We can that kind of putting stuff together is incredibly sophisticated, super useful, and really interesting. And it's simply not something Latin can do. Latin has complexities and other things. So languages develop their own kind of complexities and sophistications where they want them. Languages are not symmetrical either, but there's almost no way to quantify it. Just as, maybe the habitual be would be a good example for this. Could you help me out with an example?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So there's a tons of uses for the habitual beat. It's probably one of the most recognizable, if not the most recognizable thing from African American vernacular is our use of an unconjugated be
Mm,
in the present tense to occasionally there's a version for past tense as well, but it kind of works with
mm,
the phrase done been. But we use an unconjugated be to talk about things that happen regularly.
mm.
So he be going to the store. That means that he usually goes to the store, but
As opposed
it.
to what would the non habitual version be?
So like a non-habitual version, you would have to say like all the time or usually to
No,
to get
I
that
mean
context.
I'm sorry, in AAVE, what would be the non-habitual
Oh,
way
the
to say that? Like
non-habitual, like
he's currently going to the store, he
yeah,
just
like he going to the store right now.
okay, I'm gonna put that on the screen here. So, he'd be going to the store versus oh, I put the G there instead of going, so pardon me, everyone.
No worries.
Um, instead of, so he'd be going to the store versus he going to the store. So he going to the store, that's something he's doing right now. He'd be going to the store is describing something completely different.
Yeah, yeah, like you be going to the store. That means if you got in a time machine and you went like in the past for like 100 days into the past, most of the time, like he's gonna like if I say he be going to the store at 5, that means you get in the time machine, you go into the past. Like most of the times, you're gonna see that person going to the store like at or around 5 o'clock. Sometimes he'll be at the store at 6. Sometimes he won't go at all, but usually he's gonna be going to the store around 5. And if you go into the future in that same time machine, he's still going to be doing that particular action. Versus he go into the store, that is only right now, right now.
And this is something I just wrote. Does this make sense? Cicero be talking on the roaster is where he would give his speeches, and it's something he would do habitually all the
Yeah,
time. Is it-
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and that as opposed to Cicero talking would simply describe that. Oh, that's something he is
yeah,
doing right
that's
now.
yeah, that's in the process right now. Yeah,
And standard English doesn't have this, which is
yeah. You
what
have
I
to use
think
a few
is.
extra words to say it. Yeah,
And
the
once, this was made clear to me by, John McWhorter in his podcast I listened to, I was like, "Oh," it just, like, it clicked for me. This is not this is different grammar, and that's really
yeah,
interesting.
absolutely. The other thing we use it for, it can also describe like a characteristic. So like I'll be forgetting means I'm forgetful, but it can describe a
Oh,
characteristic that you can't really describe without a phrase. Like, if I have a friend that be learning stuff, like that means all the time, like I see this guy and he's like, hey, you know what I just learned? Or it's like, oh, like my uncle be knowing stuff. So like if I say
uh-huh.
something, we're talking about a subject, he's like, oh well, back in 1695, this is what happened.
Yeah.
It's just like how do you explain that, without like he be knowing stuff? Like he be knowing stuff means that usually this person like comments or just has
Mm.
knowledge of just like random topics or events or stuff like that. It's you can't just easily describe what that is. That's why I say in a lot of ways AV is a lot more expressive while at the same time being more concise.
Yeah. Exactly, and that's essentially what all languages will do is they'll create sophistication in new and usually very inventive ways. Um, I'm so glad we're talking about this, and thanks for everyone in the comments. I'm barely able to keep up, but hopefully, if there's anything of particularly great um, burning questions or some you have for EK, definitely bring them up and subscribe to his channel. Here's a link. What I want to talk about? What was I oh
The ebonics fiasco.
oh yeah, Ebonics fiasco. Yeah, please tell us about the Ebonics fiasco.
Yeah, so what happened mainly? So um back in back in the 90s, I think it was like 95, 96 era, basically. Um, the Oakland school district, well, actually a little bit before then, even like in California is where this sort of started. They wanted to just bridge the racial gap between black kids and white kids because in their performance in classrooms, test scores, just like education in general, basically to help bring them up to the level of expectation that all these white kids were achieving. And one of the ways they wanted to do that was to use Ebonics as a bridge to teach them standard English, which they actually got the idea from, like what I believe Norway and Sweden were doing back in the 60s. They called it the bridge method, which was they had these kids that spoke all these other dialects of Norwegian, Swedish, whatever, and instead of saying, no, that's wrong, like say it right, like they were like, okay, well, how do you say that in your dialect? Okay, that's cool. You say that at home, when you're with your family and with your friends, in school, we're speaking, the standard version of Swedish, for example. So how would you say that, in Swedish? And they would translate back and forth, which is important because if you only
Mhm.
translate one way, the kids kind of get the idea that the way they're saying things is wrong and you're not acknowledging their own language. So and that
Right.
worked very well. Like those kids like achieved the standard that they wanted them to have, and they learned the standard version of the language that they wanted them to. So they implemented that in a school in LA, and it was a success. So Oakland, the Oakland School District wanted to do the same thing with their kids, and they formally recognized Ebonics as a language and not just a dialect of English,
Mm.
so that they could basically start a program to help teach these kids standard English. What the press and what everybody reacted so harshly about was they thought they were going to be teaching kids Ebonics in schools. The
Mm.
kids already spoke Ebonics. Like they grew up speaking Ebonics, they were fluent in Ebonics. Just that's the way we learn languages in school in general. Like we've already learned all the hard parts of whatever language that we speak as a mother tongue. By the time we get to school, we just learn what you call all of those hard parts when you're in whatever your class is.
Mm.
Um, so they wanted to basically implement a program like that where they translate, like back and forth to get the kids to learn standard English, and that would help basically clear the racial gap in between the children, and they would be able to speak the desired standard English. But it ran wild on the news cycles. 24-hour news like finally started to hit its stride, and they picked up the story, and it was like they're teaching these kids ebonics in the classroom, and there was a a bit of outrage, on both sides. I mean, black people and white people, Republican, Democrat, whatever. Like everybody was like, no, don't teach those kids ebonics. You need to teach these kids how to speak properly,
Mm.
which is what they were trying to do. But everybody missed that.
Yeah, and I remember that. I remember the controversy, and go figure, sensationalism in the news before we were as acutely aware of it as we are now. Um, yeah, and I remember. So I rem I. It's interesting too because um, Jason brought this up too, and I'm glad he did. That uh, racism is a really big part of why people might be resistant to even talking about this, or even acknowledging it, which is a shame. I never really thought of that way because I'm happy that I grew up in an environment that I'd like to think, in my limited perception, was more colorblind. But as I grew up, I learned more about, like, oh gosh, wow, people are still racist. Why? Like,
Yeah.
because I grew up watching Star Trek. My favorite captain's Captain Sisko because he's just freaking awesome
Yeah, Deep
captain.
Space Nine. Yeah.
Yeah, and it has nothing to do with his race, although they had a couple excellent episodes where they did deal with that subject. Um, and though I watched Captain Picard, I love that. But then when I started watching Deep Space, I'm like, yeah, and nothing to do with race. And that's sort of how I grew up. But as I got older and going, it's like, oh, there's still this thing, this horrible thing that exists in people's minds. I believe it's possible for people to not know, to just be uninformed about what AAV is, or ebonics, or whatever term, and think it's not worthy of study or respect from a very limited understanding of what language is, and not have racist feelings. But I started to pick up on that. There have been some comments in the chat before, like this morning, which were very like, oh my gosh, like it's shocking. So I can appreciate why um, African Americans who are exposed to or speak AAV either partially or fluently would want the basic dignity to say, hey, this is how I communicate, and
Yeah,
this is a real
exactly.
thing, right? I
Yeah.
don't know. I'm completely out of my element and world of experience here. I'm just kind of saying some things. What would you like to say about that?
No, no, you're right. It's especially the younger generation. Like, it's we saw what happened with Ebonics, and we're like, no, no, we're not taking that no more. Like, this is you need to respect the way that I talk and I communicate. But just in general, if you look at all over the world, whether people call the way that they speak a language or a dialect, people have pride in how they speak. Like there, and so why should I not be proud of the way that I speak the language that we created and that we have continued to modify and that we continue to use in present day here in America. I mean, it's like I said, in some ways it's more expressive. It's more concise. It's something that is a cultural part of us. So why can we not have pride in that?
Mm. Yeah, and so it just so that I remember the ebonics. I remember adopting opinions of other people at the time. I was just a kid, and so what did I know? But thinking like, oh yeah, and I just assumed that it was something that was simply uneducated version of English, and therefore, oh, they should not be learning ebonics. They should be learning standard English, which, of course, as you explained, that was the whole point. Um, Now I'm at a very obviously have a very different opinion about it, and my opinion is that if and like it could be the case of people who speak Spanish. They should probably not, if they speak Spanish at home all the time. Like in Arizona, there's a huge, where I used to live, huge numbers of speakers and families. They speak Spanish at home and learn English in school, and can be a real struggle. And I think they do have some programs in like California and Arizona. I don't know much about the school systems there, but I there should be, in my opinion, something to give. Okay, here's standard Spanish. There's already the language that you speak natively, so here's enough to learn the standard grammar rules, and then here's English. Now, with two languages or language varieties or dialects, whatever you want to call AAVE and Standard American English, that are so similar, which causes code switching problems already for people who know what's going on, like yourself, right? You were saying
Right.
occasionally you have some code switching issues, right?
Right. Yeah.
Then it only makes sense that to give if because like I was saying before, I think everybody should know something about AAV. And then on the other side, I would say probably everyone in the whole world, since English is the language, well, everyone should probably learn standard English really well. Okay, well, if we just tell people, oh no, saying he'd be going to the store is no, that's wrong, that's bad English, instead of saying, oh, you're a native, and then speaking to them, if hopefully we have teachers who are capable of speaking fluently in AAV, telling them in AAV, oh, this is the native way that you speak, that's fine. And this is the history of AAV and everything. And this is what standard English is like. Now, one needs to know standard English to get, to write papers and stuff for the in college, because that's just the language that most people speak in the US and then internationally and so forth. Those people learn. So here you get to understand, here's a mental map, just like I know the grammar differences between Spanish and Italian. They're real similar, but there's
Right.
some things that are really different. Like estar is really important in Spanish. Italian, the stare verb is only used very limited in those, like for the how are you, and that's basically it, and a couple other contexts. So you have to have those some kind of mental version of grammar in your mind. And then if we have that, so if we have, this is my opinion, and let me know if I'm completely wrong, because I don't know. It's just me talking. I think it would be great if people who are kids who are native AAV speakers get the chance, like, here's the grammar rules of what you speak natively, and here's how you can transfer that into standard things for to write papers or to talk in front of class.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I feel. Is that a good idea? I don't know.
Yeah, that's basically the program that we tried to implement, like, or that Oakland tried to implement was like, hey, like teach these kids, how to translate both ways.
Yeah.
Like, kind of make a game out of it. Like, oh, that's
Right.
cool. How would you say that at home? Okay, cool. Well, how would we say that, in school if, we had to make a research paper or something like that? To
Right.
where they don't feel judged or like any negativity from how they speak. We completely acknowledge how they're speaking and that the way they speak is completely fine and okay, and they should continue doing that. One of the analogies that another linguist gave, which reminds me of another thing I meant to mention. There's a podcast called You're Wrong About. And they
Hmm.
did a super interesting episode about the whole ebonics fiasco. That's where I'm pulling some of my information from
I
as
have that
well.
open. I haven't listened to it yet. I wanted to listen to it. I didn't get the
Yeah,
chance yet.
yeah,
Hmm.
it's a really great episode that explains like that whole fiasco and just how wrong everyone was in great
Hmm.
detail. One of the people that they interviewed for that episode mentioned, if you know how to throw a football and I want to teach you how to throw a baseball, like you don't tell me to stop throwing a football and tell me that everything that I've learned about throwing a football is wrong and that you can only throw balls like you throw a baseball.
Especially when
Like,
there's so much skill
yeah,
transfer in languages and sports. Utilize
exactly.
what the person has to
Exactly.
achieve
Like,
the language learning goal.
yeah, you tell me to do the same thing, but just do it like this. And now you have two skills and not one. And that's what we should be doing with, just kids that already speak, AV. Like, you don't need to teach, people who don't speak it how to speak it. Like, but the ones that already speak it and your desired result is that they speak standard English, you need to develop them with, you need to treat them as bilingual children and say, okay, cool, you say gonna, like gone instead of going,
Mm.
like that's how we say going in standard English. Or you say like they ain't have none instead of they don't have any, or they didn't have any, because we also use ain't in the past tense. So teach them how to translate both ways, and like they'll be fine.
Mm. Yeah. And Chris Pernox, who's a good friend of mine, we learn to do on my other channel do live streams in Latin and ancient Greek. And did I get all your comments, Chris? I had them up. I thought they were really um Interesting. What do you say? I can imagine that to distinguish AAVE as a language might inspire fear in other is it yeah, Americans, right?
No, they're African Americans.
African. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
African Americans. I was thinking like Estados Unidos with AA.
Yeah,
Chris is also a Spanish speaker, so excuse my ignorance. Because they fear that calling AV is language might affirm the idea that African Americans are inherently inferior people. Really? Oh, like they're not
Um,
capable of learning English. You have to kind of patronize them or
yeah,
pander to them. Is that what you're kind of thinking as an idea that people might have? Right. Yeah, I see what
yeah,
you're
I
talking about.
don't like it's out
Uh,
of I've seen like I have seen comments from some people on some of my TikTok videos that do take it that way, where like, why are
mm.
we acknowledging this or something like that? And
Same in Scotland.
yeah,
Lots of Scots speakers don't even realizing they're speaking a variety of English that is so different from standard English. It has its own grammar. They just think
yeah,
it's bad. And
yeah,
they were in living memory. There are students in Scottish schools who were beaten for uttering words or grammar that was in Scots.
yeah. It's an exact parallel. Like I
It's
can't think of a
really
better
similar.
parallel. Yeah.
It's the only I think the only this key difference is that Scots is quite regional, whereas AV is all over the United States and in Canada.
Yeah, yeah. That's one of the other things as well, which is why I think people have a hard time acknowledging it. So, bringing up Jamaica again, like there
Mm,
are tons of similarities between Jamaican patois and AAVE. Like
mm,
it is intelligible to a point, but there's also stuff that's unintelligible. Like Duppy is a ghost, like Anansi is a spider. Like Anansi is a cool story because that's like directly transferred from West Africa. There's
hmm.
tons of stories about Anansi and everything. Side note on that one. But yeah, like nobody really says nobody really says Jamaicans are speaking bad English. Like they're like, oh, they're Jamaican. Like, and that's because it's like they're confined, to that island. Like the people on that island speak English that way, and nobody's like people call it a dialect and it's done. Like nobody says, oh, they speak bad English. It's just like, oh, they're Jamaican. But in the United States, we're everywhere. And like some people want to say, like, oh, well, like the way that you speak English has nothing to do with your skin color, but it really does on a certain level. I mean, you know,
If we as a society, on some level, whether they're African Americans or Americans in general, think of skin color as something that separates us socially, then sociolinguistically separations will and obviously have occurred for centuries, right?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
with AVE and like the thing is like now, like 100 years from now, this probably won't be the case, but there was so much segregation and like even after civil rights and fair housing and everything, like we were still left
Segregation's
with
in
the
living memory
results.
too. Like, I mean, like I said, I grew up with Star Trek, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this was so recent. This is terrible. You know,
Yeah,
hopefully in 100 years, I think so. I'm very optimistic, and I've a lot of faith in our people as Americans being able to reach towards that kind of future that I grew up thinking already existed in Star Trek. Oops. Yeah. If let's see, want to take a harder comment, hard in the sense that we strongly disagree with this particular comment, probably both of us, that Silaras, let's say it's Greek kind of name, um, calling AV a different language is a ridiculous pseudo scholarly stretch. I did a video on dialect versus language, which I really think you should see because um, the fact that Danish, Swedish, and Norwegian are considered different languages, and the standard varieties, which are really similar. I know the dialects are, and so forth. The non-standard versions can be quite different, but the standard versions, at least, especially of Danish and Norwegian, are really similar. Obviously, pronunciation. We had some Nordic language speakers who were commenting on this earlier, but the point is that those are more similar um, than Scots and Standard English or AAVE and Standard American English, and so forth. So, no, it's not ridiculous or pseudo-scholarly. There are plenty of legitimate linguists. We were talking about John McWhorter, who's done a lot of research on this topic in particular. And the point is that the terms like language and dialect are simply used without any, like, you can define language if you want to define language as mutual intelligibility. Okay, well, AAV is pretty mutually intelligible, especially if you're exposed to a lot of it. But I know there's things, EK, you said in your videos where I'm like, I did not understand that. And then I go back, and even if I read the subtitles, I'm like, I didn't understand that. Because then you go back and you explain the grammar and you show me, oh, okay, now I understand what's going on. I understand that why these words, like if it's done or up or these really interesting things that are doing very specific and sophisticated things, why they're there.
Yeah.
Okay, but there can be a high level of mutual intelligibility, but there's extremely high. In the airport a few days ago, I was in line. I was in Rome, and had to go via Madrid. And so there was in line, and in front of me was a nice Colombian family. And I just haven't been speaking Spanish in so long. I've learned it. At one point, I could speak it. I don't know if I can at the moment, but I can understand it fine. And I just because I wanted to confirm with the people in front of me, was this the one place that goes to Madrid? So I just like said, schools, and I heard them speaking Spanish, and it sounded like American Spanish, like from the Americas. So I said, scusate, non. Io capisco lo spagnolo, e questa è la coda per Madrid, something like that. And then they respond in Spanish, says, "Ah, sí, sí, well, like and I understood everything that they said. And we had conversations for like an hour because it was an incredibly long line because it's Italy. I understood everything, and they understood me, even though we're speaking completely different languages that are studied separately with, so like the mutual intelligibility thing is not that great of a factor. And what
No,
Ecolinguist has
no, it's
done,
not.
Norbert on his channel, has demonstrated that you can speak even in Latin to Romance language speakers, as well as Romance language speakers amongst themselves, and demonstrate that mutual intelligibility can be incredibly high. So if
Yeah.
that's your, I don't know, I'm just assuming, Silera, so that's what you're thinking about, but language, dialect, and so forth, these terms are not well defined.
Like, no, they're not. Yeah, I remember there was an equal linguist video I watched, but it was somebody speaking an Italian dialect, like little known Italian dialect that was dying, like, and the
Mm,
other contestants spoke Spanish,
mhm.
Romanian, and French, and like I got every single answer correct. And then, like, I remember the French girl was saying something, and I was like, did I just understand French? Like, how is that possible? Like, my Spanish level got high enough to where like now all these other Romance languages are starting to be a lot more intelligible.
Yeah, exactly.
So
And that's the thing. So it's like like I used to think of like, oh, mutual intelligibility, that must be the definition. And then I saw Ecolinguist, it's like, oh, this completely breaks down all of my beliefs and understand. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons too why Spanish and Italian can even have higher mutual intelligibility than standard Italian with certain dialects in Italy. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that since Spanish and Italian have been prestige for so long, they've taken in a lot of like cultismi, cultivated terms from like Latin or Greek or something.
uh,
So like aeroporto, aeropuerto, what are these words are really common, and surely a lot of them can exist in various dialects in Romance languages, but depending on what it might just not be there. Um,
yeah. Like the other thing is like there's also bad grammar. Like so there
mm,
if you have bad grammar, like the thing that you're calling bad grammar cannot have bad grammar. Like
mm.
it's impossible. Like, like if I say he store at, that's bad grammar in
Sounds like
AAVE just as
Japanese.
it is. Yeah. But
Store ni
and
iru. He's at the store. Yeah.
yeah. But like we don't claim that in AAVE, and Standard English doesn't claim it either.
Mm,
It's just bad grammar. I mean, I can understand what you're meaning, but it sounds so horribly bad that I'm like, no, 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 no. He's
right.
at the store. Say it properly. you know.
Yeah.
So if
Like
there's
pigeon.
yeah, exactly. But if there's bad grammar, then like you have to have a language for there to be bad grammar. Otherwise, it's just broken and everything is permissible. But if there's like a hard stop where, like one of the best examples also from, the ebonics fiasco is that New York Times ad where they put "I has a dream." Like nobody says "I has a dream,"
I
unless
love
you're
how
a
you tore that apart
lolcat.
in your video. That was great.
Yeah, yeah. I've now made
It's
two
like
videos where that thing
ibuprofen
apart.
or the more
Yeah.
archaic. Some, what was it?
Well,
I
like, "As a dreaming" is like a super archaic way of saying that technically would be, correct, to, like, old AAVE, like, "I's dreaming," "I's having dreams,"
You
stuff
said that
like
would
that,
come off
to
as
say.
offensive, right?
Yeah, it would come off as offensive,
Why?
but it
And
would at
why is that?
least
I
be,
don't say you're wrong, and I think I understand why, but I want you to tell me why you feel that would be offensive.
'cause it harkens back to, like, the days of the minstrel shows where, like which is another thing where, you
Like
know
blackface.
yeah, blackface,
Yeah.
minstrel shows, vaudeville, all that stuff,
Mhm.
where white people basically created a non-existent version of AAVE, like based off of some of the elements that it had. It's like if you listen to it, you can hear some old elements of AAVE, like using am for everything, like he am fishing, for example. Like that is actually a legit, like old
Really? Okay.
AAVE thing. But like the phrase "eyes are going," like nobody said that. John McWhorter pointed that out in his book. He was like, "Hey, look, I've talked to several people. I've listened to so many old recordings of former enslaved people. Nobody has ever uttered the phrase "eyes are going." It doesn't exist. It only exists in this version of blackface entertainment minstrel shows things that white
Ugh.
people have created."
Which makes Jar Jar Binks, which used something like that much worse, I think, right?
Exactly,
Ugh.
exactly. Yeah,
The
we
bag was
we
terrible
are
to begin
not
with.
fans of Jar Jar.
Ugh. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, basically, that's what that is. It's the Jar Jar Binks version of attempting to emulate something. It's that terribly inappropriate. Andrea, what so many Italian people use, is way more used to hearing and understanding Spanish language and sounds than hearing certain Italian dialects. Yeah, for sure. That makes sense, as far as the comprehensibility aspect. What did I want to I wanted to say that I am probably, as much as I'm interested in it, I remember when I was trying to, uh, learn Scots, I felt so uncomfortable trying to speak it because for one of the similarities, I felt like and because faking a Scottish accent in, English is such a stereotypical kind of character voice that I can
yeah,
do, but I don't wanna do it in front of Scottish people, especially if they appreciate their linguistic heritage as Scots speakers, because I feel like I'm gonna get it so wrong. And then so that's one thing, and I'm not even from the UK, so I'm not even involved in any because people from Southern England, to my knowledge, I think they hear or they used to, I don't know what it's like. Like, if they maybe in, let's say, decades ago or in 100 years ago, they would hear the Scots language or, an Irish accent or Northern England accents and would go, "Oh, that's low class." I don't have that. When I watch Downton Abbey, I love hearing the RP as much as I love hearing the Northern, English, Yorkshire, West Yorkshire, right? Um Oh, it's not Yorkshire, what is it? Anyway, whatever it is, maybe it's Yorkshire. The accents of the lower class accents, I find them all incredibly and equally charming, or Scottish and so forth, and as because it's just not something that I'm involved with.
yeah.
AAV
It's
is
just completely different.
right, whereas AAV is here, and more than that, there's obviously a racial component to it. So I want to know if you think my, choice never to attempt to speak AAVE is probably the right path, because it's only gonna be unless I'm with someone like you who's, like, trying to teach me, it's only gonna come off as really offensive, right?
Yeah, yeah, it really the way that it exists now, like it really has to be absorbed. Like there's not like a book that you can get that will actually teach you how to speak it anyway. Like
You gotta
you have
write
to
it.
pick it up. Yeah. You have to pick it up from, the people around you, the people
Mm.
that are, in your circle. I mean, if we hung out all the time, you'll probably hear me say some stuff. And if you just naturally say, something that I say all the time, like, I don't really have a problem with that. There are also a ton of non-black people that, grew up around us or like, we're friends with a lot of black people in school or stuff like that. And they speak, AAVE perfectly. And it's not weird at all or anything like that. However, like, if someone were, in, I don't know, Germany and
Mm,
wanted to like learn how to speak specifically AAVE, like, they were trying to study like a specific accent of Spanish, for example, like I
right.
would find that
And
weird.
and they'd inevitably have, when they start, a German accent, and they would make grammar mistakes.
Yeah.
And I'm where at which is, I when I was in Japan and I started to learn Japanese, I didn't have perfect Japanese, and all the Japanese were like, "Oh, that's so great, you're learning Japanese." They were really encouraging because it's just understood that, of course, that's a really great thing, and it's so interesting how those things are tied together, and I don't, I'm not gonna say it's wrong for it to come off as offensive because I understand why, and maybe in the future, that'll be different, but um, yeah, I find that interesting. So I recommend people watch your videos if you are already a native or partially exposed to AAVE to watch all of EK's videos on What's Good English, youtube.com/What's Good English, um, to then be able to have some. I think John McCorder was talking about that too, right? To try to get get the clear sense of the grammar.
Yeah, yeah, so you can,
Mm,
understand, what it's saying. And then also want to say like the theoretical like German person learning AVE, like I would find it weird, but I wouldn't necessarily find it as offensive as, somebody that's just putting on a black scent is what we call it, when,
right.
a person from the United States who's, just like completely changing their voice and their entire persona. Like the
Right.
example that I always give is I used to work with a guy that was one of my fellow coworkers. I was a call center trainer teaching like these classrooms full of people and like how to handle these incoming calls. And one of my coworkers, who was also a trainer, used to say that he had this sassy black woman inside of him, and he would use AVE and create this whole caricature of this fictitious stereotypical black woman, like to like scold like the different trainees when they did something wrong or when they
Mm,
made them angry. And like
interesting.
that's where like we just have no tolerance for that. It's like,
Yeah.
I mean, you can just say it. Like, I don't mind if you say I'm fitting to go to the store. Like, it really doesn't bother me. But if you're like, I'm fitting to go to the store, and then you talk like a completely different way afterwards, it's like, why are you
Mm,
mocking me? Why are you
right.
imitating
It comes
a
off as
different
mocking.
voice? Just be
Yeah.
yourself.
Exactly. Well, I think that's very, very clear advice. So I would say some people in my position who have what's English grammar supposed to do there? I don't even know what to do. It's so much easier in Latin. Qui habeo. It's so much easier in Latin. I don't even know what I was trying to say. Someone in my position, I have no cultural connection to AV except that I have consumed it my whole life through media, music, television, film. Um, and I've heard it spoken in
Yeah.
person,
Yeah.
obviously, as
I
pretty
can
much
actually
everything.
tell you one word
Please.
I'm 100% sure that you use that is 100% AVE.
Yeah, go for it.
Cool.
Yeah, you mentioned that in your video. They're cool. It's been
Yeah.
around forever.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
very persistent too as a slang word in
Yeah.
English.
And you're still 100% yourself. It's like when you say it, like you're not imitating some fictitious black person from, the 1940s jazz scene. You're just saying, "Hey, that's cool."
Which is something I wanted to bring up too, because I was thinking about, I learned that a lot of Elvis songs were covers of either jazz songs or songs that were performed by black singers
Yeah.
in the decade or decades prior to Elvis, or even contemporaneously with him. And then they either stole the songs or they got the rights, and now we just think of them as Elvis Presley songs or melodies where they were the tempo was changed or something. They're adapted, and I think some of the intentions might have been innocent, but other parts of it were simply to take something. Do you know anything about that? Because I remember hearing a
Yeah.
bit about that, and
So, yeah, a lot of
it
like
reminded me of
the
what you were
most
talking about in your videos.
popular yeah,
Mm.
yeah, like the most popular Elvis songs, like Heartbreak Hotel, for example,
Mhm.
like that, he didn't write that. Somebody that song was already in existence, and then his version of it is the one that everybody knows. And like,
Mhm.
how is Elvis the king of rock when he didn't invent it and he did a bunch of covers. Like he was just they just took what black people were already doing and they put a
Mm.
white face on it, and then oh, now it's popular. Like he also used to dance like us, but they didn't want to put that on TV, so they just always showed him from the waist up, and then it was like, oh, okay, this is cool. This is a white dude doing it. Let's go ahead
Right.
and show him dance, and then it's like all this black culture basically like got whitewashed and turned into Elvis, and like now he's the king of rock. You
Yeah.
saw something similar happen a few years ago with Lil Nas X's song "Old Town Road." Black people also invented the genre of country music, and you have this kid that made a country song, and they put it on the Billboard charts. It was doing really well, and then Billboard said, "No, that's not country music." So he then remixes the song and puts Billy Ray Cyrus on it, and then now all of a sudden it's country. It's like, how can we invent a genre of music and then say that like this particular song that we've done years later
Mm.
is that thing, and then you tell us it's not that thing,
It's
and then we have
exhausting.
to like
Mm.
qualify that with whiteness in order for it to be accepted into that genre.
It's so weird. Like I said, I grew up not thinking this, like, thinking it was all in the past, but you're, like, saying, like, this isn't even back at the '50s with Elvis. This is still, an issue with music and media, so, like, that's I
Yeah,
don't know. I can only, sympathize from my more external point of view and hope that those things change.
yeah, yeah, and it's a lot of on that side of the coin, especially a lot of like the younger generation uh with Generation Z. They've, like I said like earlier, they've grown up like steeped in black culture. Like they're the first ones, but they've also seen a lot of black culture, sort of divorced from black people. Like if you see an internet meme that says "it be like," that is 100% AAVE, but you can't tell like the race or the way that the person sounds when they wrote that meme or everything like that. So they assume it's just internet speak, which was one of the things that like the two things that make me the most mad about AAVE is when people say it's just slang and bad grammar, or when they attribute it to another group of people, like internet speak or teen slang, for example. Like, no, it's
Mm.
stuff we've been saying, for years. Something like the word simp, which kind of got pigeonholed into a very narrow meaning, but had sort of a little bit wider slang terminology originally. Like, so
Mm.
um like people say like, oh, Twitch like created that, it's teen slang, it means somebody is just like uh being like a super crazy stalkery type of or whatever. I think everybody that has heard the term basically knows what it means. However, like back in what 1992 or something like that, if you listen to Sir Mix-a-Lot's Baby Got Back, in the second verse of that song, like he says like a lot of simps won't like that song. Like that's in there. Like that was not created by
Mm.
Twitch or anything like that. It was just existing in the back of everyone's mind, sort of like in your inactive vocabulary.
Mm.
And now it's like people are saying, oh, well, that's teen slang. Like, no, that's actually been in the black community for a long time. Its original meaning was like, basically a reverse pimp.
Right.
It was still like a derogatory term, but now it's like a very specific, you're always online doing like following like a particular person or worshiping a particular person. Like that's its current like slang usage.
Right.
Like, but it's like it was sort of, I don't want to say it specifically was taken from us, but in a way, yes, that's kind of the story.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about this too with music. Jazz is whoever the singer is, whatever race, at least I think, my very limited, perspective such as it is, I think it's so normalized and mainstream for the better part of 100 years that jazz is just something that people like to dance to. It sounds like it's old-timey music, like my great grandparents would have, like, listened to or danced to, or, it doesn't seem like something that's, uh, edgy, whereas I think whereas, like, say, when I was a kid, something like rap was something that was more like, oh, that's not mainstream, and now rap is highly mainstream stylistically because, of course, there are non-African American performers who sing and write rap or R&B and so
Yeah.
forth. I think that might be inevitable when something's just good and anybody can use that art form and create that art form, it'll become mainstream. But it is got to be insanely frustrating if it's like in the cases that you just demonstrated, where um, things are being taken without acknowledgement. And
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know about the
That is
language words like words like cool or other Gen Z slang. I know that I've incorporated into my own slang that I use with my friends um, of whatever race that probably have an AAVE origin or definitely do, um, that are just so common now in American slang that people all seem to be comfortable using them. But I mean, I guess the sort of the most important part about what you showed in your Gen Z video is that they're just usurping some piece of vocabulary. This is not the grammar. They're
yeah.
not going to be able to use the grammar with any sophisticated. Like Julie Noki said, what right? She's just using it. I don't. They might be able to repeat phrases with some kind of accurate grammar, like Andrea was showing us earlier with a Latin example. But the sophistication is not going to be there.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's a sort of I started like a brand new TikTok series actually. I'm gonna figure out how to do this in like a longer like video format for my YouTube channel, but like that's just like explore like just like looking at the bad grammar of people that are trying to imitate AAVE and correcting that grammar. So actually just uploaded a video. I think it's on my Instagram. No, it's definitely on my TikTok. I'll check it out. But there was a actually yeah, yesterday I uploaded a video. It's on my Instagram now actually. From it was a Beats commercial for some new Beats earbuds, and like they used the phrase flex that clapback. So like that you can't flex a clapback. That so a clapback is basically just revenge. It's either the act of getting revenge, like because it can be used as a verb, or it's a
Mm,
noun meaning revenge or retaliation for
that's
something.
interesting.
So you cannot flex a verb like that. That's not how it works.
Mm,
You can flex your knowledge of something.
right.
Like you can't say something like flex that drive. You know, like the act of driving is not a flex. Your
Mm,
ability to drive, if you know, if you have like a little brother that's 15 and you're 16 and you got your license, then you being able to drive and you picking them up and driving them someplace, that's a flex. But
yeah.
the actual like act of driving is not a flex. So like I sort of like making like a series of stuff that people have either alerted me to or stuff that I've found, and just like correcting that grammar,
Mm,
because a lot of people like assume they know it, because they assume it's just slang and bad grammar. So because they disrespect it, they don't actually take the time to learn all the intricacies of it, and they make mistakes. And it's like, no, that's not
like
how our
like
people think.
tattoos in Latin or Japanese, which are ended up being terrible.
Yeah,
Um, you know, for all kinds of reasons that they might get something wrong. Or I've seen, people are learning Latin and they're trying to learn it. I see comments, people trying to write in Latin, nice things in the comments, and the Latin's terrible, but they're learning. And it's like, oh, great.
yeah,
That's very nice of the person to try. But then they might. There's some people that guys will say something. I remember, I can't remember who it was. Like a couple of my more recent videos where I was speaking Latin in like Rome, I was saying like in the Vatican, I was like saying "Mihi nomen est Lucius," pretty much how I said it. And someone said, "No, it's not me. It's not Miki or Mihi, or it's not this. It's the dative of possession. It's a very specific, sophisticated grammar thing that's in Latin." And they're saying like it has to be nomen mei, and it was like, basically everything the person said was incorrect, but they had this shallow level of knowledge about it. Um, and I think that's really what I was hoping today to bring to a lot of people, and I'm glad we had a lot of people, a lot of comments about it. It was just like this is not something that is easily dismissed as bad grammar. In fact, it certainly cannot be so dismissed as something that's just, yeah, it's not standard English, but doesn't mean it's, I mean, bad for you. Okay, you're
Like,
welcome to dislike or
yeah,
like whatever you
yeah,
like.
like, you don't have to speak it, I just, don't wanna be judged for, like, speaking the way I speak, you know?
Yeah, of course. And just like how, and that's sort of the Dunning-Kruger effect too. What people might have, I don't know. I mean, I feel like I couldn't be more on the bottom of that curve when it comes to AVE. I just like, wow, this is something that's really interesting that I wish I hope to continue thanks to your YouTube channel. Everybody subscribe. Uh, to learn more because, and I said this earlier, but people come in and out, so that's why I guess I'm repeating myself. I think probably everyone in the world should learn something about AAVE because everybody learns English and everybody at some point is exposed to AAVE. Might as well know that it's not it
It's
it's something like uneducated or something.
yeah,
It
yeah,
is
exactly,
not
exactly,
all languages.
that's
Yeah.
yeah, that's one of the reasons that I also decided to cover like AVE just and like really do it justice and go over like different grammatical elements is, from learning Spanish and talking to everyone, like all the foreigners that, knew English but maybe didn't know all of all of our sayings or that AVE even exists, because they will like encounter it like in some manner and either they'll see us in movies and we'll be speaking the way that we speak and they'll think that oh those people are just uneducated, like no, there's actually a rich like different intricate level of grammar like in the underworkings of the way that we're talking and communicating.
Yeah.
So like if they understand that, then it's like, oh, okay, cool. Like and like it will help, maybe bridge that bridge that gap or like, take away some of that fear of, talking to, black people just in general. I mean, if like everybody has like butterflies in their stomach when they're trying to communicate in
Mm.
a language that they've learned, like it took me forever to try to speak Spanish in public in my Spanish meetup group, and I was in a group with other people that were also learning Spanish, so none of us could really speak Spanish well for like the longest time, and just imagining that situation where like okay, well, this person speaks like a different version of the language that I'm learning that's like they get that sort of fear in their stomach and they might not want to speak to us, but like we're cool, we can like most black people I know are capable of like staying 100% in standard English, or we'll throw in a few extra like different pronunciations or different words or whatnot,
I bet
because
you've been in a situation where you just felt like expressing something in Spanish because it was that felt more natural to you in the moment, right?
yeah,
Even though you're
yeah, it
speaking English
happens
with a friend
all
because
the
you've been
time.
studying it. I have that all
Yeah,
the time. It's like with
yeah, yeah,
Italian. It's like,
exactly.
say
Like
something in Italian or Latin, actually.
yeah, honestly, the
Yeah,
past year and a half, I've spoken more Spanish than I have English, actually, just because of the whole like quarantine lockdown
that's
situation. Like,
amazing.
even though we're pretty much like free to do whatever right now,
Last year that was
you
Latin
know,
for me. Yeah.
yeah. So like it's like yeah, oftentimes like even like sitting down here now, it's like I have to fight Spanish because when I'm at my computer on a video chat, I'm more often speaking in Spanish than I am in English.
Environment
So
based too. That's another aspect, right? In family,
yeah.
if one's family is a native speaker of AAVE or of Spanish or something in the U.S., or it could be Chinese. In that environment, you just automatically feel like that's the appropriate environment to be there. When I'm in Italy outside, I don't feel comfortable speaking English at all. It feels very uncomfortable to me. Yeah, I wanted to show people this is the playlist. When's the next video coming out, by the way?
Sunday.
Oh, cool.
So I
Excellent.
unfortunately missed my upload this week, but I'm gonna upload like a couple of shorts, but Sunday will be the next full episode of AVE. I'm probably I want to do an episode revisiting the habitual B with like some more context, more stuff that I covered a bit in the first episode, but I noticed like I was first starting to make videos kind of when I did the first two videos, and I put like so much info in there, and I want to
I love them.
like,
But yeah, why not?
yeah,
That
yeah, I want to
especially for a
revisit.
new audience.
Yeah,
That might
yeah,
be, that always happens. I always have an audience that comes in and they don't know, like, "Well, you did this whole video about it," and I'm like, "Let me talk about this again anyway."
yeah,
Um, the be like, that which is narrative, and also the had. Where's the had one? There's something like that in Scots too, a narrative, um, tense, like a narrative, which is very interesting. And the had is more anterior, which is very interesting,
yeah.
whereas
So
Scots is one where it's actually a present tense, third person singular for all verbs, if I remember correctly, and it's there
yeah,
in a it's a really interesting, sophisticated way to describe things. What else did I really? Well, I loved all of them, but yeah, I recommend everybody watch at least these 11 videos, get some sense of what's going on in this variety of language. And Jace had a great term he said a moment ago, um, calling it a valid dialect or valid language, because I was like legitimate, valid. Valid means
yeah. Valid,
strong.
good.
I think valid's a fine term to that we could use. Um, uh, ego tecum consentio per nox. Um, yeah, it's Spanish is easier to speak with a little bit of winum. uh, all right. We've talked for 2 really interesting
Wow.
hours.
Yeah.
EK, is there anything else you want to talk about? I'm not in a rush to head out, but if there's especially something that we didn't cover that we ought to have.
Um, I think we, I think we covered. Actually, I wrote down a couple notes, but I think we
Yeah, take your
actually
time.
went
No, yeah, no
everywhere
rush or
that.
anything.
So,
But yeah, thanks everybody for questions. If you have a final question or comment for EK, um, let us know, and definitely subscribe to his channel if you haven't already. Go do that.
yeah, everything I wrote down, we actually did cover. I
Oh,
would
good.
say like for people that want some more information outside of my channel, there are two really good books I would recommend. One is by John McWhorter, Talking Back, Talking Black.
Mm-hmm.
Another from I forget his first name, Rifkin. It's called Spoken Soul.
Uh-huh.
It's also another linguist that wrote a book about African American vernacular. He also pointed out, in the New York Times ad, that I has a dream is bad ebonics. He also petitioned, so he got together all the linguists from his university and wrote an open letter to the New York Times saying that they disagree with this, and the New York Times refused to print it. You can also find out about that in that We Are Wrong About podcast. And also want to plug the respectthedialect.com website from Deanna
Hmm.
Latimer Hearn. Um,
Right.
so she's also like an excellent resource for just speaking for the subject of African American vernacular and like how we can like basically help kids like learn standard English with it, but also put some respect on it. um, and Sun Micho. He's got a YouTube channel. He's also a TikToker. Makes videos about the Gullah language. Super interesting person to check him out as well.
Mm. Outstanding. Good. Well, thanks for recommending those two. And what else do I want to? Oh, yeah. Just to finish, as someone who's just into languages and variety of languages, and clearly not a part of something that is important to a lot of people. Obviously, a sensitive topic. I hope EK and everyone out there who is either African American or is familiar with African American Vernacular English that I treated this subject with the appropriate respect, and that people continue to do so.
You did you did excellent, man. It's like
Oh, thanks.
honestly, it's just I'm just like super like glad to be here. Like this is a huge honor for me.
Oh,
Like
well, the honor is mine, and I hope to see your channel grow. Keep making videos about all the subjects because everyone out there too. Check out his other videos about language learning, which are also really interesting. I'm really interested in the AAVE because of how entertaining the presentation is, with the and effective the presentation is linguistically, with the comprehensible input and with the discussion of the grammatical topics. Um, but yeah, please, EK, keep making videos, keep doing this because I just think this
yeah.
is something we need to we know there's millions of people who speak this variety of language. So
Yeah,
let
I
let
will.
people
Yeah, I'm going
make
nowhere.
more videos.
Cool, I will do, definitely.
Okay. Well, we'll finish there. Thank you again so much, EK. Everybody subscribe to his channel, What's Good English, and also follow him if you follow on TikTok and Instagram.
Yep.
Thanks again, EK.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.